The motion in my name and the other names on the order sheet for today. Mr. Speaker, the motion I've tabled seeks to defend the simple principle that honesty, integrity and telling the truth matter in our politics. That is not a principle that I or the Labour Party have a special claim to. It's a British principle. It's a principle that's been cherished by Conservatives for as long as their party has existed, embraced by unionist and nationalist parties alike, and one that still guides members from every political party in this House. But I will.
The member, opposition leader giving way. I lost my mother to COVID in the first lockdown. It was a very painful experience because she was in a hospital bed. We obeyed the rules. We could not be by her side when she passed. I have made my disquiet known to the Prime Minister a couple of times now, and he has taken that on board. I am deeply unhappy at the way Number 10 has performed over this period in question. But what I would suggest to the Right Honourable Member is that it's perfectly natural in this country that you weigh all the evidence before deciding on intent, because the central issue here is whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament. Would he agree that, in us all accepting that it should be referred to the Privileges Committee, that committee needs to weigh all evidence before coming to a decision, and that includes the Sue Gray report?
Can I just say to others, interventions are meant to be short. What I would say, and I do say to us, if you're intervening and you are on the list, you will go aloud. I know the honourable member's not, and obviously wouldn't want to now he's made his speech. Here's Can
I just first say I'm sorry for the loss within your family, and we all send our condolences. I know how difficult it has been for so many during this difficult period. In relation to the substantive intervention, just 2 points, and I'll develop them later. The first is there is already a case before the House that's very clear. The Prime Minister said no rules were broken. 50 fines for breaking the rules and the law have already been issued. So there's already a reasonable case. But under the motion, because I do understand the sentiment behind the intervention, if the motion is passed, the committee will not begin their substantive work until the police investigations are complete, so that they will have all of that evidence before them, one way or the other, in order to come to a view. And I think that's within the body of the motion, and that's the right way and the way it should work. And I hope that does address the concerns that have been raised. I will.
I thank you for giving way. And further to that point of the honourable gentleman across the way, many of us in the chamber have lost loved ones over the last period of time, and we feel greatly aggrieved that we haven't had the opportunity to have our day in court, if that's the way to put it, perhaps. We do feel the need to have justice seen for all those who have lost loved ones, those who passed away and who we miss greatly. Does the right honourable gentleman feel, when it comes to justice, while we do need to see all of the evidence, there also, at the end of that day, has to be accountability in this process, and accountability means people have to answer for what their actions have been?
Well, again, can I express my sadness at the loss that he and his family have endured? And I was struck particularly just a few months ago in the way that he spoke about that in this House. I think we all were. But on the substantive point, and this is really the point of the motion, this is about honesty, integrity and telling the truth in this place. And it's an important principle, and it's one we all share. As I say, I'm not claiming this as a Labour Party principle. It is a principle that we all share because we know the importance of it. That's why it's a matter for the House to consider. But it is a principle under attack because the Prime Minister has been accused of repeatedly, deliberately and routinely misleading this House over parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. Now, that's a serious allegation, because if it's true, it amounts to contempt of Parliament. And it's not, and it should never be, an accusation that is made lightly. And nor should we diminish the rights of members to defend each other from that accusation. But the Prime Minister's supporters don't seek to do that. Instead, many of them seek to simply dismiss its importance. They say there are worse crimes. He didn't rob a bank. He only broke the rules for 10 minutes. It was all a long time ago. Every time one... I will in just a moment. Every time one of these arguments is trotted out, the status of this House is gradually eroded, and our democracy becomes a little weaker. Because the convention that Parliament must not be misled, and that in return we don't accuse each other of lying, are not curious quirks of this strange place. They're fundamental pillars on which our constitution is built. And they're observed wherever parliamentary democracy thrives. With them, our public debate is elevated. When members assume good faith on behalf of our opponents, we can explore, test, interrogate our reasonable disagreements about how we achieve our common goals. Because ultimately, no matter which benches we sit on, no matter which whip we follow, fundamentally we are all here for one reason: to advance those common goals of the nations, of the peoples that make up our United Kingdom. And I give way.
Grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for giving way. And he mentioned some of the arguments around, well, it was just 9 minutes. Well, I met a woman who was a daughter of a serviceman. He lost his life the week before that birthday party. And she said to me, what I wouldn't give for just 9 more minutes with him. I congratulate him on the way he's rising above party politics here, but to just diminish 9 minutes as just anything, it diminishes us all across both sides of this House. Would you not agree?
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention because it goes to the heart of the matter, because some have tried to suggest that a short period or there's some equivalence between these penalty notices and speeding, and that just doesn't understand the enormity of the difference. It's very rare that the whole of the nation goes through something together, a trauma together that was COVID. And there were the awful cases of funerals, of weddings that were missed, of parents who didn't see the birth of their children. And they're awful cases. But I think almost every family was marked during this period, including my own, by things that we didn't do that we would have liked to have done. Usually visiting elderly parents, seeing children. And there was a huge sense of guilt that we didn't do it, including in my own family. Guilt that because we followed the rules, we didn't do what we thought was actually right by our elderly relatives. And that's why it hurts so much. And that's why anybody trying to say this is just like a speeding ticket doesn't understand what this goes to politically and emotionally. And I will in just one moment, but just going back to the principles, because I want this debate to be about the principle, because I think this is where the debate should be. The committee will be charged if this motion goes through in determining actually whether there was any misleading. But this is about the principles that we all care about. And that's why I actually think that everybody should simply vote for this motion this evening to uphold those principles. Because those principles, that we don't mislead the House, and in return we don't call each other liars in this House, they ensure, I will in just a minute, they ensure that we make good decisions and avoid bad ones. It's what makes our democracy grow in ways that reflect the hopes and tackle the fears of those that we represent. It's what makes our democracy thrive. It's what makes this House thrive. It's what makes Britain thrive. And, Mr. Speaker, we don't have to look far to see what happens when that faith is lost, and there is no hope of reason resolving disagreements. When nations are divided, when they live in different worlds where their own truths and their own alternative facts, democracy is then replaced by an obsession with defeating the other side. Those we disagree with become enemies. The hope of learning and adapting is lost. Politics becomes a blood sport rather than a quest to improve lives. A winner-takes-all politics where inevitably everyone loses out. I will give way, and then I'll give way behind.
The Leader of the Opposition was big-hearted enough to say earlier that he unwittingly misled the House. I'm sure you'd agree with me that it's very important that we stick with the convention, that we don't call each other liars. There's a good reason for that. 2 of our colleagues have been killed. There's been a lot of attacks on colleagues. So in this debate, can we just accept that everybody here is an honourable member, and when they speak here, they may unwittingly mislead the House, but they think that they were, for instance, abiding with the rules. So can we tone down the whole nature of this debate?
Thank you for that intervention, and I will try to keep within those parameters and elevate this to the principle that we're actually discussing today, which is the principles that we apply when we're debating in this chamber. I will give way behind.
I'm very grateful to my friend for giving way, and also for what he said about the fact that we don't on this side have a monopoly on truth. I think it's a very important point that he's made there. But does he agree with me that there's something really fundamental about this, and that is whether we, as members of Parliament, are fit to hold these powers that we have in terms of holding people to account, or whether the politics will always get in the way. And it was very disturbing to hear that because there was a Labour chair, Conservative members might vote against it, and that's very disappointing. The honourable member for Rhondda felt he had to step down. But that principle that either we have an independent or we do it ourselves is very important here.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, and it is very important. We do have these procedures to hold us all to the rules of this House, and it's very important that they are applied in the right way, with the right principles. I will give way, because I said I would once more and then again here.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech. On the point of procedures, I wonder if you would agree with me that there is a bigger point here about Parliament's governance structures, that our whole system of checks and balances is completely out of date. It is beyond ludicrous that the arbiter of whether or not the ministerial code has been broken is the person who's accused of breaking it, in this instance the Prime Minister. Does he agree with me that we also need a wider look at those governance structures, which at the moment are simply not fit for purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. For that intervention, because I do think it's a very serious point, because a lot of our conventions and rules and traditions are based on the principle of honour, and that people, members of this House, wouldn't, other than inadvertently, mislead the House. And that's why the rules are set, but they're set on that proposition. And if there is a member of this House, whoever that is, that doesn't abide by those principles, those honourable principles, then that tests or stress tests the rules that we have. I'll take one more intervention and then I will give way.
I understand completely the position the honourable gentleman opposite said about toning down the rhetoric. I completely understand that. But let me just. I understand that position, but let me make this point, because I know the honourable gentleman over the years. We can't tone down the seriousness of this matter. Yes. I was in the Prime Minister's constituency earlier this week. It's the neighbouring constituency to mine, the London Borough of Hillingdon. We're campaigning in the elections. And yeah, there is some shift in vote from Tory to Labour because of this issue, but that isn't the significant issue. The significant was the number that we were finding totally disillusioned now, who'd had enough of this system, were blaming the system itself. That's what we're fighting for here. This is what we're campaigning for here. We're campaigning to restore the credibility in the democratic processes of our country.
And I'm grateful for that intervention. I think it's a really important and powerful point, because if we don't pass this motion, if we don't take this opportunity to restate the principles, then we are all complicit in allowing these standards to slip. We're all complicit in allowing the public to think we're all the same, nobody tells the truth, there are alternative sets of facts. I will in 1 minute. I've given way a lot and I do want to make some progress, but I'll try and come back to the honourable member. But because the conventions... I'll make some progress and I'll try to come back to people where I can. The conventions and the traditions that we are debating this morning are not an accident. They've been handed down to us as the tools that protect Britain from malaise, from extremism and from decline. And this is important because the case against the Prime Minister is that he has abused those tools. That's the case against him, that he's used them to protect himself rather than our democracy, that he's turned them against all that they are supposed to support. And members opposite know that the Prime Minister has stood before this House and said things that are not true, safe in the knowledge that he will not be accused of lying, because he can't be. He stood at the dispatch box and point-blank denied rule-breaking took place, when it did. And he did so, as he did so, he was hoping to gain extra protection from our good faith that no Prime Minister would ever deliberately mislead this House. He's used our faith, our conventions, to cover up his misdeeds. Because, I'll just finish this point, because after months of denials, of absurd claims that all the rules were followed, of feigned outrage at his staff discussing rule-breaking, we now know the law was broken. We know the Prime Minister himself broke the law. And we know that he faces the possibility of being found to have broken it again and again and again. Because the police investigation is ongoing, we don't need to make final judgment on the Prime Minister's contempt of Parliament today. When the time comes, the Prime Minister will be able to make his case. He can put his defence, of course he can. He can make his case that his repeated misleading of Parliament was inadvertent as his defence, that he didn't understand the rules that he himself wrote. He can make that defence. That his advisers at the heart of Downing Street either didn't understand the rules either, or misled him when they assured him that they were followed at all times, or that he thought he was at a work event even while the empty bottles piled up. He can make those defences. He can make those defences when the time comes. But, Mr. Speaker, I will in just a minute. We already know he has a case to answer. The Prime Minister said no rules were broken, but over 50 fines for breaching the rules and the law have now been issued, including to the Prime Minister. And anybody who denies that simple fact has their head in the sand or has given up any interest in the truth, given up interest in the traditions of our nation in order to prop up a law-breaking Prime Minister. Now, the motion today would refer the matter to the Committee for Privileges, a committee that has a government majority. So no one can say the Prime Minister is not being judged by his peers. The committee would only investigate the Prime Minister for contempt once the police have concluded their investigation. So no one can say there is prejudice to the rest of the inquiry. And, of course, any findings the committee comes to, any sanctions they might propose, would then come back before this House as a whole, so no one can say it's too soon for the House to decide. It is a system of self-governance, and it should be, because with the great privilege that comes with sitting in this place comes the great responsibility to protect the conventions that underpin our democracy. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. On conventions, does he also agree that language is equally important, and therefore would he take this opportunity to distance himself from the honourable member who spoke earlier on, who said that he wanted to lynch another honourable member, or the honourable member who sat right next to him, who called members on this side Tory scum? He should distance himself from them.
That's a shame. I actually thought we were having a reasonably serious debate. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order. I'll just say to the Honourable Lady, she needs to sit down. In fairness to the member in charge, he's given a lot of interventions, but I certainly don't need you standing up and waiting to catch somebody's eye. Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if this just descends into a shouting match, we lose the principle which is there to defend all of us, including all the members opposite. We're not claiming a principle to support these benches and not those benches. It's a principle that supports all of us. And if we fail in our... I will take that intervention, yes, of course.
Most grateful. The Leader of the Opposition has quite rightly just said that it affects everybody in this House. Would he accept that at this very moment in time there is a complication, which is that the Committee on Standards report, which is currently being conducted under the aegis of the Sir Ernest Ryder recommendations, does raise questions about whether or not it is possible at this juncture to have a fair trial and natural justice. That is currently under discussion. Within the House. And the same will apply in regard to the question of the Committee on Privileges, which has itself already been criticised. I was on the Joint Committee myself, and I can assure the Leader of the Opposition there are serious problems which arise in relation to the need to rectify those omissions in the procedural fairness.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I've heard the case he puts on natural justice now a number of times, and of course he has every right to make that case. I disagree, but that's the point of the debates we have. But that debate about natural justice or due process doesn't need to hold up this process. Yeah. This motion can pass today, should pass today, and frankly everybody should support it passing today to uphold the principles. And I don't think that there is a discussion about natural justice, an interesting debate. We will take different views on this, but that doesn't need to hold up this process. I will give way and then I'll make some more progress.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he's quite correct to prosecute the case on the basis of principle. But there is still in the order paper, even if the Government is not going to move it now, an amendment which would indicate that not everybody in this House shares his view about the importance of these principles. So does he share my view that at the conclusion of this debate there should be a division so that we know where every single member of this House stands in relation to this principle? Because at a time like this, on an issue like this, there should be no hiding place for anyone.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I agree, because we have a duty here today in relation to this motion and in relation to these principles. And if we fail in our duty, the public will not forgive and forget that we have done so, because this will be the Parliament that failed to stand up for honesty, integrity and telling the truth in politics, failed to stand up to a Prime Minister who seeks to turn our good faith against us, and failed to stand up for our great democracy. And it's not just the eyes of our country that are upon us. It will also be the judgment of future generations, who will look back at what members of this great House did when our customs were tested, when its traditions were pushed to breaking point, when we were called up to stand up for honesty, integrity and for truth. I move the motion, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, part of this is about the Prime Minister. My habit over 46 years has not been to make a public or private comment about a party leader, whether mine or somebody else's. I don't propose to change that now. If I have something to say to a Prime Minister, I say it to them directly, as I did first with Harold Wilson and I've done with most other Prime Ministers since then. My preference would be to go with the amendment. If it's not going to be moved, I can't.